Hello and welcome to your next tutorial in C++, and today we're going to be learning how to create a vector of objects. I'm very sorry for the hiatus. Finals are coming up in a few weeks and we've been having all these projects and whatnot and school and all, so I've been really busy. Sorry about that. I was going to have these up last weekend, but sorry. But anyways, so what do I mean by a vector of objects? Well, we've created a vector of integers, right? And you probably know that we can create vectors of, well, pretty much every data type. But did you know that we can also create a vector of objects? Now, why would we do that? Well, you remember in the last tutorial in the classes and object-oriented programming, I created my patients in here. You know, I would go, what was it, BMI, patient 1, something like that. And then I would go BMI, patient 2, something like that. But basically what this does is it only allows a specific number of objects, whatever the programmer puts in here. But creating a vector of objects will then give the user, not the programmer, the ability to make as many objects as they want. So that they don't have to worry about the programmer, that's us, manually putting in all the objects. So that's really, really cool. So first let's include, we're going to need a string. Do we need string? Actually, I don't think we will. So let's just include vector then. I don't think I'll need any of the others. So we're just going to include vector, and well, before we can actually create our objects, we need to create our class. So this class, all it's going to do is basically be all we're going to have for objects are students. And the two pieces of information that we'll store will be their names. Oh, so you know what? I guess that will be our strings. So I will need that. And their grades. And their grades will be chars, or characters. So yeah, we will need string. Okay, so, well, let's create a class again. So now I can show you how to do this, but a lot faster than the half hour or 40 minutes that I took before. So I like to create the headers first, actually. So I know I created the CPP last time first. I don't know why. I should have made the header first. Oh, there it is. So this would be called student.h. There we go, add. And we're going to want to add another CPP file. And it's also going to be called student. Add. And, well, what are the pieces of information that we're going to need? Well, first of all, let's go back to the header file. And just for clarification, I'll call it header. And down here, so I'll have my if in def, and it's going to be student underscore h, and then define student h, and then and if. Did I spell that all right? I think I did. And then we're going to have include iostream, and we're going to have to include string, and we're going to have to include, what else are we going to have to include? I think just using namespace std would be good enough. So using namespace std, and I don't think I'm going to have to, I didn't prepare this, I don't think I'm going to have to include vector in here. So using namespace std, I think that's all good. So I'm going to go back to my main, and now we're going to have to include that header file. There it is. Oh, that's not it. Come on. So you have to include student.h. There we go. So that's all good. Going back in here, that weird error went away. I don't know what that was about. Okay, so let's create our class. So it's a class called student, and semicolon there, of course. Then we'll have our public access modifier and our private access modifier. So what are the member variables that we're going to need? The two member variables will be string new name, and what's the other one going to be? Char grade, or I'll call it new grade. How about that? So those are going to be our member variables, because that's all we're going to be dealing with. So what is the first piece of information that we're going to need? Well, we're going to need the default constructor. So I hope I spell this right. So it's going to be called students. That's it. So let's go in here to our student CPP, and let's include, not this guy anymore. Let's include student.h, shall we? And then we're going to need to access our student class, our little scope resolution, then our student constructor. So I'm not really explaining this because you guys should have seen this before. I've done this all in the last one. So strings are automatic, so char for new grade basically. So new grade will be equal to, is that going to work? No, it's got to be empty. There we go. So an empty thingamajigger. So that's good. So then we're going to need our overload constructor. And remember, you can have as many overload constructors as you want, just as long as they either have a different number of parameters, or if they have the same number of parameters, make sure it's not the same data types in the same places. That's pretty much how overload works. So this one, we're going to need a string and a char. So we'll go in here and access students again. Then we're going to need string name and char grade. Then we're going to set our member variables. So new name is going to be equal to whatever we pass in, and new grade will also be equal to whatever we pass in. So that looks good. I think our destructor will be next. So the destructor is just student. I hope I spelled everything correctly. I have a feeling that I'm misspelling some stuff. At least in my comments. Oh, excuse me. At least in my comments. So that's a tab. Our destructor won't do anything. We'll actually have our destructor do some stuff when we work with static member variables. So we're going to have some accessor functions, only two because, well, we only have two member variables. So our two accessor functions, what are they going to be? It's going to be, one's going to return a string, so string get name. That's going to be a constant because we're not modifying it. And let's see here, so it's just going to be get name, at return, string, name of student. And I'll actually throw out the other one now, which is a char get grade, whoops, const, and that one's going to be get grade, and then the next is at return char grade of student. There we go. So that's our two accessor functions. So we'll go down here, students get name will be first, const, and all that's going to do is, oh whoops, forgot to throw out string in the front. There we go. And all that's going to do is, oh, did I misspell it? I guess I did. And all we're going to do is return, what am I returning? New name? I can't remember. I'm doing this too quickly. See, I didn't even write this down. I'm doing this on top of my head again. I really should not do that. I should really. Excuse me, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why I'm doing this all. And there we go. So that looks like it's all of our accessors right there. So then we're going to need our mutators. Even though we're not going to really use them, but you typically make these by default anyways. So this would be void set name, and it's going to be string, and that's it, I think. So that's going to be set name and at param string name of student, and then another void set grade char, and that one's going to be called set grade, and all that's going to do is set the grade for the student. So char and then grade of student. Okay, there we go. So that's our mutators. So now let's do our mutators. Student set name. So that's going to be string name, and then we'll set new name equal to name. And then down here, sorry if this is a little boring, because you guys probably remember all this anyways. So set grade, so that'll be char grade. And then we'll set the member variable equal to whatever we passed in. So that's going to be grade. Okay, so is that everything, Destructor? Oh my goodness, I really think we got everything now, so I'm really excited about that. So, well, here's our class here, so now we can finally start making objects. So now that we have everything working, I'm probably just going to use the overload constructor by default. I'm probably not going to use the mutators, but because I'm just going to use the overload anyways. So, but anyways, let's go back into our main CVP. Now that we have all of our code written for our class, our student class, let's actually go into our main CVP and actually fill this out. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is to actually create, should I create a function, or is that going to take too much time? Should I just fill out my vector in here? No, I think I'm going to separate it. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is, well, first of all, I'm going to create a vector of that object. So let me show you how we would actually create a vector of the class student. So typically, we went vector, and then we would go int or something, and we would call it my vector. Does that ring a bell, doing it like that? Well, instead of doing a vector of ints, what we're going to do is do a vector of students. Oh, wait, I got to spell it right, though. And I'll call it my class, something like that. I'm going to call it my class because it's not a class as in this kind of a class as in, a class of students. So I'll pretend that I'm the teacher, so this is my class, and it's got all my students in there. So the first thing I would like to do is to go into a function that will allow me to fill it up with, well, all my students. So I'm going to want to create a void and call it fill vector. And what are the people I'm going to be putting in there? So all I'm going to need is my vector, right? So in order to pass that in as a parameter, just go vector and then student. And as you might remember, pass it by reference. You should always do that. But will we need a constant modifier in the front? No, because we're going to be modifying our vector, so we won't use a constant modifier in the front. So remember that. So this one is called fill vector, fill in student information, and that's pretty much all it does. We'll have an at param vector of student, and it's by reference students in class. There we go. So now let's actually create the implementation for our code, the definitions. So it's going to be called void fill vector again. And then inside here, we'll type out vector of student. And it's by reference, and I'll call it new my class. So that's what I'll call it. And our curly braces. So now let's actually figure out how to go about, filling this up. So the first thing I'm going to ask the output is how many students are in your class? Question mark. So then we'll create an integer, and I'll call it, what should I call it? Capacity? Nah. I'll just call it number. That's pretty vague. Or, I don't know, how about class size? So class size. So that's good. Then, after we type that in, so we'll have a cin class size. Then we're going to need our while loop, I believe. So let's go into our while loop. And, actually no, I think we can do a for loop. I'm going to scratch that for a moment and do a for loop instead. So we can go create an int I is equal to 0. Then while I is less than class size and I++, we're going to do the following. So basically we're going to be typing in some information in here, won't we? So what's the information that we're going to need? Well, we're going to need to enter both the student's name and the student's grade. Is that the other thing? So yeah, that's all we're going to do is type in their name and their grade. And this for loop will just allow us to keep entering in that information, basically. So we're going to have a cout that will say student name, So student name, and well, then we're gonna have to input the name. So how are we gonna input it? Well, basically what we can do is go cin. Well, actually, before we do that, I'll have to actually access the create another variable. So we're gonna need a string and a char actually. So I'm gonna go back up here and create a string, and I'll call it name, and I'll create a char called grade. So I'll have those guys up there waiting in the wings. And so it says cout student name. So then we're gonna have to actually type in the name, right? So cin name. And then what we're gonna do is, well, you know what? I guess I can go cout this again first. So I'll have it say student grade, like as such. Or should I say enter name? Yeah, I should have it say enter student grade, and enter here. So I'm a little sloppy because, as I said, I'm not doing notes on this. So cin and then grade, right? Okay, so now we have our for loop here, and we're going to go inside of our for loop. We'll be prompted to enter both a student name and a student grade, and we'll have to keep doing this for each value of I, but for as long as it's less than the class size, so we'll fill out all the students. But how do we actually add it to our vector? Because we want to add it to our vector, don't we? Well, in order to do this, what we're going to have to do is what's called instantiating the object, which we've done this before. So how do we do that? Well, basically what we did was, before, remember we typed in BMI? Well, this time, the name of our class is student. So we'll type out student. And since we aren't going to actually be referring to our objects by whatever names we give them here, I'm just going to call it new student, just something that's very vague. And then a semicolon. But as you might remember, instantiating your object this way will actually have it use the default constructor by default, because, well, it's your default constructor. We want to actually use the overloaded constructor so that we can pass name and grade into our new object. So in our header file, it'll find our overloaded constructor and pass in our parameters, then set our member variables equal to what we passed in on this side. So in order to do this, let's just add parentheses here. And then what you're going to want to do is type in name and grade. And there you go. So now every time we increment through this loop, every time we enter a name and grade, a new student will be instantiated with these new parameters, basically. So it's a new object every time. And what we're going to do is, now we might be wondering, but how are you going to refer to our objects? It's always going to be called new student. Come on, Adam. I remember in the last tutorial you made a BMI patient 1 and a patient 2. Well, don't worry. Even though that's the same name, it will be saved inside of the vector. So we're going to access the vector. We called it new my class inside of here. So we'll go new my class, and then we're going to use dot, then pushback. And you might have remembered, with integers, we could just put in like an integer or something, right? And it would add that to the end of the vector. Well, how do we do that with objects? Well, just put in the name of the object. So I'll type in new student. So every time we go through this loop, we'll be adding a new object to our my class vector. So that's really, really cool, isn't it? You gotta admit, that's pretty cool. And because we're passing this vector in by reference, those changes will be saved. So that's really it for this. So is that all I wanted to do? I guess that kind of is. Should I add in another end line? I think I should add in another end line right here at the end here. So I think that would make it look nice. I'm not too quite sure. And maybe I should do another end line after the whole thing is done, just to separate them. So now we have that. Now let's actually figure out how to print all of the students inside of our vector. So how do we actually print the information of all of our students? And not to mention, how do we actually access the individual objects of our vector? Because that's pretty confusing, isn't it? Let's figure out how you go about doing that. So the first thing I want to do here is actually call the function. So fill vector. And we're going to be passing in my class. So my class. There you go. So that's done. So the next one will be the print. So avoid print or print vector or print class. I'll just call it print vector. And again, all we're going to need is our vector. Now this time, are we modifying the elements inside of our vector? No. So this time we can pass it in as a constant, just to make sure no changes are made, since we are going to be passing in by reference. And remember, the reason why we're passing in by reference is because vectors are large pieces of memory, or they take up a large piece of memory. So you don't want to have to make duplicates by passing them in by value. So you want to avoid that. So print vector, and prints the information of all students, and the parameter is a const vector of class student, and it's by reference, and it's the students in class. So that's really cool. So I'm just going to copy this all the way up till before the semicolon. I do that because I'm pretty lazy. V, then our curly braces. Then we're going to need to give a unique name, so I'll just call it the new my class again. Even though it's not new this time, but oh well. And well, let's actually learn how to print this. So, well, I guess we can use a for loop. Now I'm actually going to show you something really, something new that I didn't really think about before. You remember how we would make a for loop like this, and for vectors, and I call it an insign int I is equal to 0, while I is less than new my class dot size, and then I plus plus. Well, this is actually insufficient code, and the reason is because every time this iterates, when it checks this expression right here, it's going to have to go inside this class in order to check the size of the vector. Now this would be necessary if, and only if, you're going to be modifying the size, if you know you're going to be modifying the size of your vector in here. So if you're going to be changing the size and you might need to use this, use it. But in order to make it more efficient, if you know that the size of the vector is not going to be changed, just create an int up here and call it size, and set it equal to new my class dot size. Then right here, just use size, the variable that you created right here. So, and actually this has to be an unsigned, sorry. Unsigned int, there you go. So it's unsigned on one side and unsigned on the other. Okay, so, well, let's actually figure out how we access the information inside of our vector. So how do we go about doing that? Well, what you would do is, first of all, let me make a cout and print this information. So we're going to have a cout that will say student name, and a space, and then here I want to access the name of the first student inside of our vector. So how do we do that? Well, first let's type out new my class, then like the vectors we did before, we would access them by the index number with the I, right? Just like we did with normal vectors long before we knew about objects. Then use the dot operator, and then look at this. Notice how you can see all the information inside of our class for that specific object. So in order to get the name for the student at index 0, we would use the get name. And I think that will be it. So then I would go end line, just like that. So that is how you access individual objects inside of a vector by their index number, and only when you're accessing just one of them can you see these pieces of information, the functions and the variables. So as you'll see here, when I go student grade, colon, and then new my class, if I just go dot, notice how if I just go dot, all I can see are the methods and whatnot for vectors inside the vector class. So that's all I'm seeing there. But if I access the individual objects at I, then I can see like our accessors, our variables, our mutators, destructor. So we're going to want to get the grade. So notice how we're still using our access modifiers, but I'm not using my mutators. Oh well. And I'll add in an extra end line. Actually, I think I can... Yeah, I'll just add an extra one right here. So I think that'll be good. And I think that should do everything that I want it to do. So hopefully everything is spaced out nicely. So then I go print a vector. And let's test this out. I really hope this works. I really hope this works. And look how small our main function is. It's just a declaration of a vector and 2 callings of functions. That is it, folks. So let's check this out. Let's run it. So Control F5. So how many students are in your class? So let's say there are 3 students. So enter name. I'll throw an Adam. Enter a grade. Let's say I got an A. Let's enter another name for a student. Let's call him, I don't know, Jill. I don't know. That's from my other tutorial. Enter a grade. Let's say she got a B. I don't know. And let's go Eric, and say he got a C. And there it is. And there it is, right there. So we properly filled in the vector with the information that we typed in, and for all these corresponding objects, and then we printed the information for each of those objects in our vector. Isn't that just awesome or what? I'm so excited about this. So this is probably really important for you to learn, is to learn how to create vectors of objects, so the user can determine how many objects they need inside of their program. So I'm so sorry that this was such a long tutorial, but I wanted to do all this properly. But look how small our main function is. That's just amazing. But anyways, I really hope this tutorial was helpful for you, and I hope you join with me next time, and we're going to learn, I don't think we're going to do inheritance yet. I think we're going to do static variables first. But anyways, I'll see you next time.